You know, a natural disaster isn't always just about nature. Sometimes that rushing water does more than just flood streets. Sometimes it reveals cracks that were there all along. Cracks made not by weather, but by us. We're going to dive into the disaster in Makhachkala, Dagestan, where a truly historic flood exposed a shocking, man-made crisis that was hiding in plain sight. Okay, so our story starts on March 28th in Makhachkala. It's the capital of Dagestan, a republic down in southern Russia. On that day, the city got hit by a weather event so extreme it basically rewrote their history books. In just one 24-hour period, the skies just opened up and dumped 50 millimeters of rain on the city. Now, I know 50 millimeters might not sound like a crazy number on its own, but to really get the impact, you need some context. So to put that into perspective, the city's entire average rainfall for the whole month of March is just 23 millimeters. They got more than double a month's worth of rain in a single day. The city's infrastructure, it just wasn't built for that. Not even close. And this wasn't just some big storm, it was genuinely historic. I mean, local meteorologists said this was the single most intense March rainfall the region had seen in over a century. It completely shattered records that went all the way back to 1919. The impact was immediate, and it was absolutely catastrophic. You're talking over 327,000 people losing power. Bridges just collapsed, severing railway lines. 9 entire villages were completely cut off from the rest of the world. And to make things even worse, the tap water got contaminated, leading to urgent public health warnings. The city was officially in a state of emergency. Dagestan's governor, Sergei Malikov, was surprisingly blunt about it. He admitted they saw the storm coming, they prepared, but the reality was so much worse than even their worst-case scenario. And that admission alone just shows you how completely overwhelmed they were. The system was basically designed for a world that didn't exist anymore. So, you'd think once the floodwaters finally go down, the worst is over, right? But about a week later, something happened that turned this natural disaster into a deep and, frankly, disturbing mystery. This timeline is absolutely critical. So, March 28th, the storm hits. Then, a full week goes by. And on April 5th, a 3-story annex of a bigger apartment building on Aivazovsky Street just crumbles. It just fell to the ground. Now, thankfully, the authorities have spotted some warning signs and evacuated over 300 residents from that building and 4 others right next to it just before it happened. So no lives were lost in this specific event, which is amazing. But the fact remains, a building catastrophically failed. And this brings us to the central question of this whole thing. The ground wasn't shaking, the rain had stopped, so why on earth would a building collapse a full week after the flood? Well, the answer reveals a problem that's way deeper than just high water. The official investigation kicked off right away, and what it uncovered was that the real cause wasn't the storm itself. Nope, the storm was just the trigger. The real cause was a hidden flaw, something that had been built into the very fabric of the city for years. Yeah, this whole problem started long before a single drop of rain fell. It was really a slow-motion disaster, a story of bent rules and cut corners just waiting for a catalyst. To really understand the scale of this, get this. A report from way back in 2018 found 328 illegally constructed apartment buildings in Makhachkala. 328. That's just a staggering number of potential ticking time bombs scattered all across the city. So how does that even happen? Well, this slide kind of breaks down the whole cynical process. Developers would get a permit for a simple little private house. Then they'd just illegally build a huge multi-story apartment block on that same land. They'd pay these tiny little fines for each violation, and then, this is the wildest part, they'd use the courts to legalize the building after it was already finished and people were living there. The whole system was a workaround for the rules. So now we can finally connect the 2 parts of our story. You've got a historic flood on one side and a city just filled with illegally built, potentially unsafe housing on the other. This is the moment those 2 realities collided. And look, the city's own mayor, Jambulet Salavov, didn't pull any punches. He said publicly that the chaotic construction was one of the main reasons for the collapse. That is a direct admission of a massive systemic failure. The investigation uncovered the smoking gun. That building that collapsed and others nearby, they weren't just built poorly. They were built in probably the worst place you could possibly imagine, directly in the natural riverbed of the Tarnika River. They literally blocked a waterway with apartment buildings. So here's what actually happened. When those record floodwaters came rushing down, they tried to follow their natural path. But that path was now blocked by buildings. So the water had nowhere to go but down and around, and it just started relentlessly washing away the soil and earth that was supporting the foundations. A week later, enough of that foundation was just gone, and the building simply gave way. You know, what happened in Makhachkala is so much more than just a local tragedy. It really serves as a stark blueprint for how urban disasters can unfold in our era, especially where extreme weather meets these hidden vulnerabilities. This whole event gives us a clear 3-step recipe for disaster. First, you have unregulated construction that creates this fragile system just waiting to fail. Second, you get an extreme weather event, the kind we're seeing more of all the time, that acts as a trigger. And third, you get catastrophic failure, a disaster that feels sudden but was actually, in reality, decades in the making. So ultimately, the big takeaway is this. The floodwaters didn't destroy that building on their own. They just revealed its fatal weakness. This wasn't really an act of God. It was a failure of regulation, a failure of planning, and a failure of oversight, with catastrophic consequences. And this leaves us with a final and pretty unsettling question. The story of Makhachkala forces us to look at our own cities and ask, what shortcuts have been taken where you live? What ticking time bombs of regulatory failure are lying dormant just beneath the surface, waiting for the next storm to bring them crashing down?